Well, my name is Ashley Stewart. I'm so excited to be here with you all. I will tell you a little bit about me, give us some context, and get into the conversation. But today we're talking about trauma-informed care, and most foundationally to this conversation, the importance of leading with accused inquisition. And so that's kind of going to be the baseline of what we're doing today. I'm sure you all have seen this session description, which talks about this being interactive. I know that the Teams and Zoom and stream fatigue is real, so please take what you need in terms of being on or off camera. But I ask that y'all engage with me, that you come off mute, that you share, that you type in the chat. I always share with people I have been facilitating in online spaces for a very, very long time, like over 10 years now. So there's very little engagement in chat that would be very distracting to me. So feel welcome to type and engage and participate as much as you would like across the different ways. We're going to explore foundational principles and practical applications of trauma-informed care. We're going to do this a little bit differently. Perhaps you've been to a trauma-informed care training before, funneling less into the category of talking about what is trauma. It's going to look at more systems and solutions level focus. We're going to examine the power of inquiry over assumptions, talk about learning approach to individuals, teams, communities, and openness to intention. We're also going to talk about this across diverse settings. So this is going to lead us to our objectives, which is not only defining trauma-informed care and the relevance of it across interpersonal, organization, and systemic levels. We're also going to identify the importance of psychological safety in the environment. We want to recognize how identity and culture shape our context for trauma responses. And then we're also going to do some work together to develop actionable strategies to inform it, not only for ourselves, but for our teams and for our communities. So I'm really excited to do that with you all today. I don't know about you, but when I'm in a facilitated space, I like to know a little bit about who the person facilitating is. So, a little bit about me. I am the director for the Center for Strategic Transformation. SC4 Innovations. There, I have an opportunity to do some incredible macro-oriented work. My work focuses specifically on justice. I also am one of our equity subject matter expertise, as well as our trauma subject matter experts. I am a professor, a full-time professor. Formerly, I was the program director in a college of public health. So, integrating some academic background into my approach. I'm also a provider. I've had my own small mental health business, so bringing in some provider lens as well as doing consulting. So working directly and immediately with the community to uplift lived and living expertise and narratives from our communities. And very excited that some of our work that we've been able to do in cities and in areas around trauma-informed practices is award-winning. I'm also a researcher. I focus on institutionalized impacts. You'll see a lot of that today. And I think most importantly, among these list of things that I'm providing context on, I have subject matter expertise, and particularly as we talk about many, many topics, a person with a lot of intersecting identities that play a huge role in me showing up and being a critical part of this work. So I'm really honored to share space with you all today and looking forward to being in conversation with you all. Just to get us going and chatting and engaging in the chat, I'm going to go through some of these trauma-informed conversational best practices. My favorite thing about this is that it's something to set a foundation or set the stage for us as a group. But then in addition to that, it is also us getting into some immediately solutions and strategies right from the very first start. So I'm going to read these and provide a little bit of context to some of them. And my ask of you is that if there are any that stand out to you, any that you particularly like, or even if one you have a question on, please let me know, put it in the chat. And I'll also create a moment after I go through them for you all to share as well. So the first is to expect a lack of closure as we go through this work. A lot of times we have a desire to put a bow on it, right? But there is a gift in being in the present. And so sometimes we'll leave with even more questions and enthusiasm, and that's a good thing. Ask for clarification. Right now, there are 35 of us in this space, which means that there's 35 perspectives, 35 experiences, and 35 lived realities that are coming together as part of this conversation. So we want to create an environment where we ask for clarification, where we engage meaningfully, as we may be using terms differently. Embrace discomfort. Discomfort is a great space of growth. This work is not for others, it's for us. I'm a note taker, and sometimes my notes are like, that's a good, I need to tell somebody that, right? But it's notes for ourselves, but notes for others as well. So what's shared in here, we should absolutely take in and begin to create culture change. And that means that it's also work for us to do to be leaders in sharing the information. We want to honor all experiences and expertise, recognizing that both come in many different forms. I recognize and honor that there is lived expertise in this space, lived and living. And so at any point in time, if folks are wanting to share your lived or living expertise, know it'll be honored. I absolutely value learned and scholarship, and also as a paramount form of our knowledge, our lived and living expertise. So I welcome that always in the space. Safe and brave. We're talking about trauma, so some things are going to feel really safe to engage in and create an environment that continues to produce a sense of safety, but also recognizing that safety comes with an asterisk, right? The idea of safety can also in itself be quite activating to folks. And so we want to create an environment that we allow ourselves to define that as it relates to bravery or as it relates to how people show up, because what's safe to one person might not feel safe to others. And the idea that safety can be achievable in all environments is also something to create an honor around. Revisiting welcome is my absolute favorite. It acknowledges that we all process information differently. So if I am on slide 32 and you want to come back to something on slide 1, you are welcome to do so. In fact, I encourage you to. I hope that you do. And in life, many of us are able to, we're talking and we share our ideas. And then there's some of us that it's not until a couple minutes later that we're like, you know what, that really reminds me of, or that connects to this, or, what I was thinking about when she first said that was, I welcome folks to bring things back into the conversation. It allows us to acknowledge that they all have different processing styles, and it's never too late to bring something into the conversation. This is fluid, dynamic conversation, so I welcome you to revisit topics at any point in time. Affirm and give credit, support one another. We want to revoke expert positioning. You all have to be experts all the time in your work, and so we want to give ourselves a space to just be here and be a learner, listening to understand, even if we don't all agree on different topics. Be accountable for the impact of our words and actions, and recognizing that accountability and clarity are kind. Accountability is kind is another one of my favorites because we exist in an environment where people are often afraid to engage. We're afraid to engage, we're afraid to talk, we're afraid to share ideas because call out culture has absolutely created barriers for some of us to feel safe to do so. And accountability is kind really resonates with me with a session like this because we're talking about trauma informed best practice. We're talking about being trauma informed and leading with inquisition, meaning that everyone who's opting to be here right now wants to reduce trauma and stress for themselves, for other people, and in the environment and in the people we serve. So if I'm doing something that's counter to that or creating a barrier for that and someone raising that to my awareness, that's a very kind thing to do. And so we want to lead with accountability as kind. It's kind to receive it. It's kind to share that with someone. And it's also kind to the folks who may not be impacted by it in the same way in the future. We want to be gentle with ourselves and others. And we want to recognize that we cannot challenge what we cannot acknowledge. If we want to lean into the words of folks like James Baldwin, not everything can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. So we're here to talk about things, create space, and that'll be a big part of our conversation today, as well as giving ourselves grace. All right. Popping over, opening up my chat here so I can see from folks, hopefully. I would love to know, what do you think? Which ones stand out to you, if any that you particularly like?
the accountability one.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
love
feel
that.
like it allows people to deprivatize a lot of things that they feel inside, and
Mhm.
it opens the space for openness and the conversation.
I love that, Larry. Yeah, thank you. I love how you expound on it. That's great. Other folks, you're welcome to come off mute. Just stop sharing for a minute so I can see the chat more clearly and hear from folks. Mhm. Expect lack of closure. Yeah, great question. I do believe that the recording will be shared with you all too. So I saw the question about the slides. Expecting lack of closure is a skill that we're learning daily. Absolutely. Absolutely. We cannot challenge it. We cannot acknowledge, rush. Giving grace to revisit those who process at different times. It's been a game changer in my work, in my personal life, etc. Ida, are you unmuting to share? Oh, okay. Giving grace to revisit for those who process differently, embracing discomfort, revisiting welcome, affirm and give credit, give space to different learning styles. Yeah, Ben and Michelle. Right. So these are some things to take with us throughout our time today. It's also things that we want to continue to take with us as well as we begin to implement more trauma-informed practices within our work. Creating a safe space, developing a relationship of trust with no judgment. Jacqueline, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Rule to revisit. If I click to the next slide and you're still typing, please continue to type it into the chat. We all type at different speeds. We all, maybe want to go back and fix something. Maybe some of us are like, yeah, it has a type of whatever. However, people choose to engage, all of it's welcome. And just because I changed the slide doesn't mean that what you are typing is not important to our conversation. So please um, continue to send it because this is an ongoing conversation. Okay. So just to ground us, and some of our work, maybe not. I don't necessarily know what everyone in this space does. Unfortunately, I wish I did. But some of us, it might be part of our role, our daily role to lean into trauma, to support people with experiences of trauma, to understand the roots of those trauma, and potentially diagnose that trauma. What we're talking about here today is quite different than that. What we're talking about here is to be trauma informed. And what it means to be trauma informed, what it means to be trauma informed is to lean into the importance of inquisition. What it means to be trauma informed is to recognize that we don't know. We don't know what's activating folks. We don't know what's triggering folks. We don't know people's past. We don't know people's current. We are leading in a trauma informed way. That means that we're okay with not knowing, but we want to create an environment that if and when and how people are in need of a supportive space, that we're able to be more thoughtful and intentional about the entire environment. That's what we're talking about as we talk about trauma-informed care, trauma-informed practices. In addition to leaning into specific people who we may know are experiencing trauma or for ourselves experiencing trauma or traumatic stress, but also just creating an environment that regardless of if we know or if we don't know, there's a priority of healing centered in inquisition that's focused on. Throughout this presentation, you will hear me say activated. I use the term activate the same way that most people use the term trigger. So someone say that's a trauma trigger for me. You'll hear me say trauma activator. That is because I do a lot of work in gun violence, and the term triggering can be activating. So um, just know that I'm using that interchangeably. Whatever language you use in this space is absolutely welcome. Thinking about trauma informed engagement. We're going to start off with a little activity. I'm going to get you a little activated, maybe, okay? And let's say that you are hanging out, you are in your space right now, and then all of a sudden you see a lion. I know this lion looks really cute, but imagine that this lion is in your space right now. What are you going to do? This lion is in our space. What are we doing?
I'm gonna let the lion have the space.
Larry said it's
Out there.
yours. Oh, yeah. That might be a good option, Larry. Run, hide. Absolutely. Fight, flight, freeze up, run, or try to hide. Maybe sit, see what happens. Absolutely. Patricia, would love to hear from you. What were you thinking?
Okay. Actually, kind of just jumping back. So one thing that I am hoping to, discuss or get out of this training
Sure.
is I am off the camera too. Forgot about that. I'm hoping to learn ways to effectively manage, again, trauma-informed care. Everybody's situation is different. How to successfully navigate a situation, where you have three differing situations, three different opinions on how to effectively manage situations like that, without infringing upon the rights or situations of, other people that may not be involved, but like a roommate situation,
Mhm.
kind of thing in our shelter, for example.
Absolutely. So some of those dynamics where there's multiple different perspectives, multiple different realities, multiple different truths, but people are having to share close proximity.
Hello, what's up? Hello.
Absolutely.
No,
Thank you, Patricia.
thank
Thanks. And please feel welcome, folks. If there's other things that you're like, I'm really hoping to talk about this, we're going to have some consorted time at the end that's going to be crowdsourcing ideas too. So that'll be good to think about some of those specific scenarios. Yep. All right. We've got a lot of different things that we're potentially doing here with our friend the lion, freezing up, running, sit and wait and see what happens, staying calm. I love all of the different responses. I often joke when I do this. It's a joke, but it's the truth. Um, and when I do this, there was one time when someone who was participating, their like parent used to work with lions and knew exactly what to do. And I was just so thrilled that someone had a solution for me. I do not remember what it was, but yeah, so there's a lot of different things we could do. And as you can see, it's starting to lean into these fight, flight, freeze, fawn, faint responses. We're talking about the activation of our central nervous system. We're talking about that stress cascade. When things come up, when we're experiencing things, our bodies tend to respond in a way that helps prepare us to fight, to flight, to freeze, to fawn, and to faint. Most people are familiar with fight and flight. Folks might be less familiar with freeze and fawn. I think freeze comes really naturally. People know or can anticipate that freeze is a natural response. Fawning and fainting may be newer to folks. Before we even get into kind of pulling apart what these mean or what they look like, the most important thing to acknowledge for me is that these are all responses that people are doing to keep themselves safe, right? And what we'll start to get to is that there are labels or ways that we talk about these different responses or ways that we characterize these different responses. And at the end of it all, at the root of it, these are different ways that people are protecting and keeping themselves safe. So when we're looking at a fight response, right? I didn't think anybody in here shared it, but plenty of times I hear people, they said they're going after the lion. They're going to go for it, right? Folks are running from the lion. People are staying still and hoping for the best. Some people are fawning, offering something to the lion. You got some snacks you're ready to offer up. Some people like to think, I might just see if it's a friendly lion and take my chances there. And then, of course, fainting is less of a is less based in the moment automatic decision, but something that is more involuntary where someone actually faints. So faint is called a lot of different things. You might have heard it as flop or fallout. It literally describes a person who's unable to respond and becomes unresponsive. I leave it on even though it's not talked about a lot because inevitably there's always someone who says to me privately later or next day that that is one of their responses, and they're really grateful to see it on the screen. So you have the fight, the flight, the freezing, and the fawn that's showing up for folks. And so we want to talk about what that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flop look like within social environments, within housing, within community, within um, neighborhoods, right? Within offices. What does that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response show up as? And so I welcome us in this moment just to take a moment to think about it. And without going through each of them for the preservation of time, I'm hoping that you could think of what are some of the ways that you hear or see people be labeled or their behaviors that you see show up that might be a fight, a flight, a freeze, a fawn response. I'll give you an example. A fight response might be someone who is labeled or seen as being assertive or aggressive. And a fawn response might be someone who's seen as a people pleaser. What are some of the ones that you see as these human behaviors showing up within these social environments?
I feel like I see people. I think it's freeze up usually. If you ask them like a certain question or something like that, and then it activates whatever trauma that they went through, and then they end up just kind of freezing and then giving not the real answer. You know what I mean? Because it's how
Yeah,
stressful it is for them to convey it.
absolutely. Larry, I just want to uplift something that you said that goes back, because rule to revisit, it goes back to the first slide. That might absolutely be a stress cascade or a stressful, traumatic experience. It also might be some processing difference too, right? A lot of times when people um, have differing or diverse processing styles, will offer an immediate response because you're waiting for me to answer you. But actually, it's going to take me a little bit of time to process what it is that I want to share. So, I like to, I really appreciate that you bring that up. Anyways, how do you see it? How do you see it show up? How do you see it labeled? Whether the label is appropriate or maybe you see the label as inappropriate.
I think I see like different types of trauma. People react differently. Like could be the fawn reaction where I'm sick of being attacked. I'm just going to try to fade into the background and you won't notice me. You'll leave me alone because you're someone else that might hurt me. Or you might fight. You might get violent. You might scream at people to push them away from you. I think it's hard to sit quiet and not take any of it as personal, and so that after the reaction, you might be able to get somewhere in that therapeutic time that follows with a person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's good. Some other examples. You can come off mute. You can put them in the chat. Mm. Fawn, pushover, soft, freeze, coward. Yeah. Doing some really interesting work in communities. We started to have conversations about people who are receiving services who continuously offer or say yes to everything or volunteer for everything. And we began to examine like what that might be rooted in. Are people saying yes, absolutely to everything because they're afraid that if they say no, they're going to lack access to something, they're going to miss something, they're going to be not considered for something. Being called difficult because you stand up. Mhm. Leave or ask for help, but then don't follow through. Flight, yeah, yeah. Ask for help and it was hard, and then that follow-up is even more hard, and then you're seen as flaky or inconsistent. Yeah. Right. When I do this with supervisors, I often get like, okay, sometimes that freeze response looks like procrastination. And, yes, there's sometimes, look, we'll admit it. I'll admit it. There's sometimes I'm just kind of procrastinating on something because I don't want to do it. But then there's other times that procrastination might be rooted in, well, last time I shared this, or last time I gave this information, I was disqualified. Or last time in this environment, when I demonstrated my best, I was shut down. And so that procrastination is either a preparation or trying to perfect something in order for it to not evoke as much stress or trauma as a response of other people. But it might also be the environment's not safe enough for someone to say that they don't know, and that might be the root of it. So again, we're going back to this trauma-informed care, different than treating trauma. The trauma-informed care is about navigating an environment where we simply need to inquire, to understand, and to create space. Yeah. Yeah, Fernando, I see that a lot.
And I think it also depends, I hope you can hear me, on the space
Yeah.
that you're in. Because if you're not in a safe space, when the flight, freeze, fawn, all happen, you're even more guarded.
Yep.
So I think it
Exactly.
also depends on the space that you're in.
I agree. Absolutely. Thanks, Michelle. If you're muting or typing, please continue to do so. Oh, Helen, fawning often being labeled as manipulative. Yeah, fawning is very interesting because a lot of times I'll hear such positive things like, "Oh, they're the best. They just take on anything. They never say no. Why are they afraid to?" Or people who are doing things to try to be safe and being seen as trying to manipulate the situation, but really desiring to have at least a level of control that feels safe to folks. That's important. It's important. So let's validate and verify some of what you all are sharing, right? We often define or talk about trauma as the event. One thing we want to acknowledge is that trauma and adversity, chronic stress, these things are universal to the human experience. They affect individuals, communities, and organizations, which is why we continue to take a multi-level approach in this conversation. Also, very important for me to identify is that trauma is a result of an event, series of events, circumstances, one-off, observing something happened to you directly. But that part about it being a result is where I really want to lean in, because a lot of times we'll talk about trauma as the event. You experienced that, oh yeah, that's probably trauma. You went through that, that's trauma. But really what we want to acknowledge, and very verified by many different types of philosophical inquiry, is that trauma is not the result, is not the event itself, excuse me. Trauma is the result of it, which means that for some person, it can be processed in my body one way, in your body, totally different. It can be seen as trauma or something that becomes a barrier or necessitating a goal of safety for me. And it might be something that elevates or empowers someone else. And so how we know what is experienced as someone as trauma or not is really based on some of the impacts of the environment. How a person experiences could be tied to their cultural beliefs, support systems, where they are in their life. It could show up immediately. It could show up gradually over time. More and more as we understand what is trauma, we begin to realize that being able to say definitively, like this is trauma or this is not trauma, is complicated, it's nuanced. And instead, we really have to understand the result of how something that someone experienced impacted them and impacted their life. Two people go through the same exact thing. It could be traumatic for one person. It could be stressful for one person. It could be, you know, a life-changing event in how people approach things differently for someone else in a way that like catapults or that is experienced in a purposeful way. We don't know until we are engaging with people how different events shape or experience their lives. And so we want to take an ecological approach. And you'll see I have a lot of branched or webbed imagery within this presentation, and that's quite intentional because as we start talking about the impact of webs, whether that's neurological webs or social webs, we're knowing that these are critical places to intervene. So as we think about what is an ecological approach, as we look for solutions or approaches, let's start here. Many of you may be familiar with ecological systems theory. It's pretty popular. A lot of people talk about systems perspectives, but often we don't break down what is the term of ecology. And if you're not familiar with ecological or systems perspective, no worries, because we're going to go into it now too. And ecology is a branch of science that is concerned with the interrelationships between organisms and their environments, people and places, me and you in the spaces that we exist, the folks who are serving in the communities, in the areas, in the housing, in the community, in the neighborhoods, folks within their environment. And important about an ecology as well is that it is the totality of patterns and those relationships between an organism and the environment. So it's not that it's me in this one space, but it's me within that broader context, that person and environment perspective of who I am in these various areas of life. My favorite part of the definition of an ecology, although I get excited at most parts, my favorite part is that an ecology is an often delicate, intricate system or complex. We are delicate, we are intricate as we navigate through these systems, and it is in fact complex. And so we have to move with the level of delicacy that is necessary, especially when, as Patricia mentioned earlier, there's multiple layers, there's multiple people, there's multiple experiences involved within that environment. And so we're looking at multiple levels, right? How does this show up for people within these layers? What does it look like in an interpersonal dynamic, but also what does it look like organizationally and more systemically? I'd argue that those are probably places that we examine less. What does it look like within and among people? What does it look like within organizations, including navigating through organizations like ours for the folks who we're serving? And systemically, what are the broader narratives? What are the broader perspectives? What are the stigmas or the biases that are impacting people within environments? I'm just going to pause here in case anyone wants to reflect on that. I know we just talked about some of the labels, but how might these labels or these experiences look different maybe at an organizational or a systemic as people are navigating through those stigmas or biases? How might that show up? And I did give y'all a heads up on the first slide that it's interactive. So hopefully all my pausing to welcoming your voices is welcome. Interpersonal.
Well, I know when I've seen like homelessness in the city, there's can be a lot of trash associated with the area, and that's an automatic stigma. Not to say that these poor folks don't have access to a clean living environment. Mm-hmm. And I know that that's difficult. And if I was in a tent out in the country, you wouldn't see me. I wouldn't be visual to you with some of those same problems or needs. And in the city, you can get to services better. But mm-hmm. I think that people pick on villages of homelessness for stealing and whatnot too in their area. And I know if I was desperate and I needed something, I would probably steal it too if I was, in that place. There's no place for being virtuous. So I think that, yes, the best thing in the world is if we could treat every human exactly the same and get everybody off the street and get them housed, and get them the services that they need to stay there and to have a decent life. And I don't know, it's hard. There's so many variables and there are a lot of stigmas. I know we work through ours, but the people in the community don't. They just judge and want to throw us all away. Mm-hmm. It's tough.
Yes.
Let
Thank you
somebody
for
else
sharing.
speak.
I appreciate you sharing. Thank you. Yeah. Other folks, anyone want to add on or even affirm or see what that looks like in your work? Fear of advocating for themselves from past trauma or fear of having a standard for what folks want, that autonomy. Jordan, that's so important. Yeah.
I think systemically, we're kind of conditioned to believe that homelessness is bad. It's inconvenient and it's a crime in some areas. Like I think, we're told organizationally, like, this is sad and this is a problem and we need to help. But then kind of systemically, you see that it's an inconvenience. Well, you can be homeless, but you can't be homeless in my backyard. You can't be homeless in my community.
Wow. Oh yeah, Shani had me on the edge of my seat. I didn't realize you were finished. I was like waiting for the rest of it.
I like felt
Absolutely.
like I could have kept going, but I didn't want to I didn't want to rant. But yeah, I really feel like it's, not in my backyard. It's an issue, but I don't want to have to see it. I want to help, but I don't want it. I don't want to help right in my neighborhood because then it's unpleasant. It's not pretty. So I think like there's just such conflicting messaging there.
Mhm. Yeah. And NIMBYism. It really aligns with what Jacqueline was saying too. Absolutely. Also, Shannon, sorry, I kept calling you Fernando earlier, but
Oh,
Shannon.
that's okay. Yeah, sorry. It has my last name first.
Please forgive me. Larry, I saw you on mute.
Oh, yeah. So it kind of feels like almost like an ecology of like disconnect between people who are housed and those who are unhoused. Like it kind of skews the context of those who are unhoused. You know what I mean? It kind of takes away their past and their history and what led up to where they are. To be unhoused.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to lean into is the work of Dr. Ken Hardy. And, it talks about how we cannot understand people outside of context. That context matters so much. That's powerful. Just leaving a couple seconds before I open up the slides. No pressure. Let's talk about some strategies. So we want to get to a place that we want to begin to engage and talk about different forms of psychological safety. Psychological safety is a term that a lot of people are using now and talking about now. And I've always liked to talk about psychological safety as it relates to people navigating bias, stigma, and if I'm being fully transparent with you also very broadly, systemic and structural oppression. Psychological safety is very important to talk about. And so I want to highlight a couple quotes that validate what you all shared and also take us into the next layer of our conversation. This quote by Patricia Hewlin says that if an environment feels threatening, we'll tend to conform in order to achieve a sense of protection and safety. Leaders, people, whomever who's willing to take that on, benefit from more innovative conversations, better organizational learning, and people feeling their full and engaged self, right? This is taken in the context of a work environment, but we also know this to be true. If environment feels threatening, we will conform in order to achieve a sense of protection and safety. That's if you're in your workplace, that is in your home, that's in your community, that's if you're seeking services. When environments feel threatening, we will contort. And I like to use the word contort intentionally because there are people who are shifting the way that they talk. There are people who are shifting or changing or um, not requesting accommodations that could be really transformative to them because of biases around ableism. You have people changing the way that the tone of their voice, the way that they show up in an environment to avoid racism or sexism or classism. You see people, leaving out critical information that would be pertinent to them being able to receive services because that environment feels threatening. We're conforming to achieve a sense of safety and protection. This quote is about psychological safety. It's about trauma-informed environments. When our bodies and minds experience safety, it allows us to collaborate, to listen, to empathize, to connect, to be creative and innovative and bold. And I get really excited and empowered thinking about what it could look like when we are able to facilitate a level of care or an environment where people can be creative, innovative, and bold, where people can listen, where people can empathize, and people can connect. And that happens in an environment that prioritizes wellness, that prioritizes healing, and then prioritize a level of inquisition that can lead to a trauma-informed approach. So this has positive benefits for our relationships as well as our lives in general. These are two of my absolute favorite quotes. And so I'm glad to be able to bring them into this space. Mainly because my dog Huey is barking because we just started a really bad storm here in New Jersey. But I'm going to pause here to see if anyone has any things that you want to reflect on, come off mute and reflect on as it relates to these quotes about psychological safety. And so these are some thought prompts that I just wanted to put out for us to think about the folks in the communities that we serve. Authenticity versus adaptability. When is adjusting necessary? When does it become inauthentic? And going back to that conversation around psychological safety, what are the different consequences potentially of being or showing up in ways that are inauthentic? Again, we're talking about our characteristics and our personalities, but we're really talking about a much deeper level of inauthenticity that requires people to hide and not really embrace their full selves. Fake it until you make it. Does faking it, does putting on a particular persona help or harm authenticity? Does it empower people or does it harm authenticity? And then emotional labor and code switching. Who bears the burden of adjusting? Jordan.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put my hand up before the slide was done. It actually is interesting that this is mentioned because this is something that I am struggling with right now. I will choose to be authentic, but at what cost? And then decide what's necessary. So faking it until you make it works until it really, really doesn't. And then you flame out, and at what cost? Who does that help at the end of the day? And then especially in the realm of housing, code switching has its necessity, but as a person of color, I'm not interested in code switching that much more. You either get comfortable with being uncomfortable or you don't, but I'm going to show up how I am. I think at this point, I've run out of the ability to fake it. I'm not going to fake it anymore. You either accept it or you don't, or I'm not welcome here anymore. And I'd rather you tell me that as opposed to pretend like we're good.
Absolutely. It is deeply consequential. It's energy depletionary. And people don't realize how much energy it requires. There's another quote on these same topics of psychological safety, inclusion, and authenticity that I didn't show that talked about productivity. And it mentioned that people spend so much time making those necessary contortions of themselves to be safe in an environment that it ends up impacting the literal time, energy, and effort that they're able to contribute to the work. That is not a consequence that is healthy or sustainable for folks. And so, yes, people think that people are making small pivots. They're not. They're deeply impactful to our lives. And it's important to talk about in all areas, in all stages. So thank you for sharing, Jordan. So as we get, we're starting to and continuously engaging in different strategies, right? The strategies of being able to talk about the strategies of awareness and knowledge, but let's also talk about what can be done within environments. So I like to get us thinking about that by talking with the problem of bias. And when I say the problem of bias, the interesting thing about this is I'm actually talking about the problem with bias trainings. I do a lot of trainings on biases, and there's a lot of research that shows that trainings on biases often are ineffective. there is a very bad storm happening in New Jersey. So if my internet goes out or you all have a hard time hearing me, please let me know. I'm trying to talk a little bit louder than the rain, but I'm not sure if you can hear it. But if you can, please tell me so I'll know. There is a lot of information that suggests that bias trainings are ineffective. The reason why is because we tend to address biases similar to how we see them on the screen. There's this bias, which this could be a person, and this is a bias that this could be a person. Without this acknowledgement, talking about biases becomes kind of like an ever-going circle that doesn't get resolved. Biases are a normal part of human cognition. Biases can be positive, negative, or neutral. When I meet people who say, I don't have any biases, I'm like, we really need to talk about that because we're talking about human cognition. It helps us make split decisions and judgments. And so it is so important to talk about biases. But typically when we try to address biases, correct them, or fix them, we talk about this bias and this bias. I'm trying to change this thought. I'm trying to change that thought. But biases really have their power, if you will, because of the impact that it has on the culture, on the web, of how it circulates out, how it grows, the thumbprint that it leaves on communities. And so we talked a lot about biases. You all just named a lot of biases. We were talking about NIMBYism, right? We talked about the stigma around people and their trauma responses. So when a bias exists and someone agrees or participates and agrees and participates, this person's one bias, people are going to have biases that are positive or negative or neutral. But what really ends up becoming the impact of biases is when it starts to get out here, where this person's like, that's not a bias. That's a fact. I've heard that from multiple people. That's not a bias. That's a fact. That's how we've done it for this long. That's not a fact. It's always been like that on this street. It's always been like that in Kensington. That's a fact. And so that's where biases really get their power. That's why people begin to get treated differently within a culture. That's why the sustainability of the exclusion of people or the stigmas of people begin to impact services, and we treat people the way that we see them is because of this broader influence that it has on culture, on the thumbprint. And similarly, how we can agree and participate and get to a place of fact that the bias begins to impact people in a negative way. We also see that biases or interventions of biases could also be challenging or inquisition, right? It's not even that we have to disagree with people. We might participate or challenge. I hear you in saying that. I also have heard or find this to also be true. Or, that's a really good point that you bring up. I wonder if that could be something else instead. So that interruption within conversations is actually a very effective form of an intervention to address biases. It's so small and it seems so insignificant, but let's be honest, it's very uncomfortable to interject or intervene within this web. But the power or the potential of it, if you were to interrupt this here, it never gets to the point that it's seen as a fact, or it never gets to the point where it begins to impact the culture. So intervening somewhere like right here with a disagree or a challenge or an inquisition could drastically begin to change culture over a period of time. We really underestimate that power. Just pausing here to see if there's thoughts or reflections about the impact of bias. I'm just giving folks a moment to either unmute or type in the chat.
Yeah, sorry. There's a story. This person was trying to buy a car and she walked into a dealership, and because the salesman had a handlebar mustache, she walked back out and could not buy the car. And I said, why? Do you know why you felt that way? Why you judged that whole person on a mustache? And she had no answer. She just had to leave. She couldn't. So,
Mm.
so sometimes these things are so, like you say, have always been that way. That person is just not even willing to look at it, just accept that is so sad, you know? Just such a takes away from your life of getting to know people, who they are, what they consist of, what has brought them to their that appearance. It might be a wonderful story if you had time to sit, to listen, improve listening skills.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important. I have had people cut me off and want to give me the answers when I never asked for them, or you know what I mean? Like they just know it all and they're going to tell you whether you asked for it or not.
Right.
I've learned the difference between empathy and listening, and how empowering that is to not give my advice or opinion until you ask for it. And then I hope you respectfully will listen to me because you asked for it. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
those are skills we got to learn, right?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people, times people chime in or, oh my goodness, I know exactly what you're saying as a desire to be empathetic. But the reality of it is that even if we're going through something with the same name, same labels as someone else, we want to always lead with that inquisition. I experienced this and it felt like this in my body. I'm wondering what that was like for you. We have to learn to listen. We have to learn to inquire. Yeah, to be really trauma informed and provide trauma informed care. I appreciate you bringing that up. Jordan.
So I am part of three separate marginalized communities. And so
Mhm.
very often there are a lot of default bias. So you aren't allowed to be vocal about having an issue with something because then I'm perceived as the angry black man. You're not
Mhm.
able to be more articulate or by default not be seen as well educated and articulate because the general bias about the black community is that they're uneducated and quote unquote ghetto or hood or whatever. And so when you start to speak with a language or a verbiage that is considered to the general public as more educated, now all of a sudden it's like, oh, where'd you get that education from? How are you able to have the privilege to this access of knowledge? And with the kids that I work with, those who have substance use history, they are expected to always be using substances. And that's the reason why they're unhoused, or that's
Mhm.
the reason why they have these disparities or whatever the case may be. It's very common when we work with single mothers. Oh, this is a product of your own following or your community. Or if someone is Hispanic, they're expected, they don't know English. It really just crosses across a lot of things. And then the more that you have different intersectionalities of those marginalized communities, the worse it gets. And so I often try to come to everything with an open mind. And I'm obviously human, so I do have my
Mhm.
failings. But I think that especially when you're talking about different biases, like you said, by default you're like, oh well, that's why someone who is living in a larger body and they said they have certain pains or whatever. Well, of course it's because your weight. Doctors will automatically assume that because you live in a larger body, that's the baseline as to why you have certain issues. But
Right.
your point, that's I've yet to see there be a world where trainings or anything else dissolves that. It's just you see something, you assume, and until you're corrected and hopefully hold on to that correction, there is no change. So I like that you like named that particular bias, and it's very very poignant to my work and my own lived experience.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing. Yeah. And, you know, I think sometimes it almost feels so it might even seem to people to be so oversimplified that you begin to intervene within the context of the bias. But we see this in like micro interventions in response to microaggressions. We see this in a whole realm of like business models. There is those very intentional interventions that begin to shift or change the narrative. And I really want to highlight, to build on what you were just saying, what Jordan was just saying. Shannon puts it in the chat that it's interesting that sometimes people observing or the bystanders of conversations tend to become uncomfortable when someone comes from a place of inquisition. And I think that begins to highlight, while it's such a simple solution, it actually ends up being more complicated because it will make people uncomfortable. Why aren't you just agreeing? Why aren't you just making everything here feel comfortable? Sometimes that participate, when we look at that web, that participate or agree, sometimes it's not, oh, my name's Ashley and I agree with that statement. It's, oh, you come on. All right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a laugh. It's a participation. It's coming from a place of discomfort. Sometimes you're like, I really don't agree, but I'm just going to laugh and walk out of here, because that is part of that socialization, creating a space where we navigate things that can potentially cause barriers to the folks who we're serving because of that level of discomfort. So I think that's a very poignant point, that that discomfort plays a huge role. Yeah. Majority of what Jennifer has seen has been connected to mental health. Folks being shared as like too far gone, can't help, we've tried, unhelpable, right? I think about my first experience working and providing services. It was, the people in here are going to come try to take everything that you have to offer. They're going to lie to you. They're going to manipulate you. And if you don't develop a tougher skin, they're going to eat you alive. That's creating from the door a very intentional bias that will then influence how people are served, or how a person perceives the ability to serve someone. And that creates a sense of a culture that harms rather than moves us toward that goal of creating spaces of true trauma-informed healing and wellness-centered. That discomfort of conversation, that discomfort of finding our own voice, it doesn't have to be an objection. I don't agree with that. That might feel comfortable to me. You might be like, I'm not going to do that in this space. But it might be, there might be more to that, or I don't know about that. From from what I've been able to observe, right? It's about finding the natural, organic way to begin to interrupt or disrupt the building of that web that requires practice. Oh, I love this. Leading with Inquisition reminds you of the book, The Scout Mindset. It's about a scout is asking questions to gather information to see how everything is, versus the soldier mindset that's guarded and kept to the self. When asked questions, the soldier gets defensive. When the scout is excited to learn information. That's good. Yeah. I'll definitely have to.
It's also, so I had to look it up because it was a book I had to purchase for school. But under the thing, it said this book is about how to make better decisions by training yourself to have a scout mindset, which involves being more objective and open-minded and avoiding biases and emotional influences.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
It was
Michelle.
very eye-opening.
Yeah. I love it. I love resource sharing. Thank you for sharing that with the group.
You're welcome.
Shannon, Tendon Trini wants to talk about calling in versus calling out. Absolutely. And that's where I really lean into that accountability is kind. If I'm doing something that is impacting the environment, it's very kind for someone to tell me, but it's also very kind to receive that information and to choose to do something different. Yeah. I love this conversation. I think bias trainings are also very important as well. And they have to be willing to get into looking at the context of it that really makes it, that really impacts the culture, and moving beyond saying you need to work on your bias. I have a bias. I have a bias that people who attend trauma-informed care workshops on Fridays are literally the greatest people on earth. That's a bias that I have, and I'm sticking to it, right? But I also have to be able to think about what that bias does in the context of inclusion or exclusion of other people as well. But I'm aware of it. I think that people who attend trainings on Fridays around trauma, just totally different type of amazing person, right? Biases can be positive, negative, or neutral. And we have to lean in and see what is the broader impact when we engage or don't engage. And if that bias that I had, although positive, were exclusionary to someone else, it would be a very kind thing to do for someone to call me in, or to allow me to know how that might be impacting other people. That is a culture that is possible. And when it happens, it is very healing. I didn't go too much on here because I knew we wouldn't have time, and I was correct. But I also think that the context of identity is also very important. Identity and experience-based forms of trauma and stress, right? Thinking about race-based trauma, historical trauma, and intergenerational trauma. Insidious trauma. Insidious trauma maybe is less familiar to folks. That's the trauma and stress associated with living as a person and experiencing oppression. And then acculturative stress and trauma is another topic that I like to talk about, which I often attribute or align with the experiences of immigrant refugee population, migrant families. And acculturative stress and trauma is the stress and trauma associated with engaging in a new culture or cultural context that has a lot of different layers to it, including biases, including policies, including advocacy for family, etc. I often think about children of immigrant families who often serve as translators for their families because of our lack of resources to be able to have various translation services, and the collective stress that that puts onto young folks who they do willingly and awesome and, caring for their family, but it also comes with its level of stress too. So within the context, I just encourage people to look into identity and experience-based forms of trauma. This also includes collective trauma, collective stress. Right now, I'm doing a lot of work with organizations as a whole to address the collective stress of doing work with differing perspectives and oftentimes a lot of tension. This is something we're leaning into. What does that collective stress or that collective trauma look like, as well as collective healing? And then compounded an allostatic load, honoring what folks in this room have shared, honoring what Georgia shared, right? It's not one element of our identity, it's the intersections of them. And that compounded and intersectionality is important to consider when we're serving and thinking about how to create the healthiest environment. We cannot take one element of someone's experience. Is it substance use and is it housing? Is it their race and is it ability? All of these different intersecting experiences and or identities play a huge role in how care shows up. And so we want to think about the allostatic load. That's kind of like description of like weathering, when things continuously build up until they have a much bigger, deeper consequential impact. Because I'm in front of you all, it is very important for me to talk about secondary stress and secondary trauma. Why is that important to me? Because I know that given the work that you all are doing, you all are at a much higher risk for secondary stress and traumas. And this is why that previous slide was so important, because it's compounded. This is just by virtue of your work. And then you take on all the systemic and structural things that you're also processing as well. So when we talk about self-care and wellness, sometimes that conversation is posited as a luxury almost versus a necessity for us to do this incredible work that we do day to day. I want to take a moment to honor you all and honor the work that you're doing. Honor the labor of it and honor the time that you have to take, that I hope that you take to be able to prioritize your wellness to be sustainable in this work. Your wellness absolutely matters and is one of the key, most critical components to serving others. And so I want to bring light to that. People are often experiencing secondary trauma, post-traumatic symptoms, that these are things that come up where you hear something or you're exposed to something by virtue of your work or through observation, and you start to experience those traumatic or stressful experiences yourself, whatever those symptoms may look like. Vicarious trauma, slightly different. In vicarious trauma, we're looking at shifts in cognitive schemas. So in addition to feeling that secondary stress, you're also starting to feel like your worldview is changing. Maybe you're experiencing some of that about the environment, often tied to that experience being connected to an element or aspect of your identity as well. And so how do we practice wellness? Right? How do we increase our awareness of our personal cues? This is something that we're going to want to do. Know what stress looks like and know what burnout looks like, learn like what capacity looks like so that we can have our own personal cues. But when we talk about burnout, at least for me, it's very important that we don't only talk about the impact of it on individuals. Burnout is also a consequence of the environment. So we want to think about how to shape the work environment or shape the outreach or the engagement strategies that we're doing that would improve those team dynamics and create a more collaborative or collective approach. This is the actionable step, improving those team dynamics, creating better cultures of transparency to improve those team dynamics, allowing people to say that they don't know, or creating an environment where you can revisit things, improving those team dynamics, and then beginning to shift and change the culture, doing those micro interventions, beginning to shift or change the culture of biases, providing more opportunities for people to share various perspectives. When we're trying to respond to something in the moment, you have that heated perspective of different people contributing. But if we have a culture where people can come back to things and talk about things, then that also provides an opportunity for people to observe and validate, but also not feel like they're going to miss their opportunity to share their view or their perspective as well. If you don't have a culture where people can revisit things, that's not going to be achievable. So we have to begin to shift and change the culture as well. This is a process of strategy. It's, I think that one of the challenges is some of it seems like so common sense. I'm like, yes, we should definitely do that. But it requires strategy. And I find this is where it ends up falling short, is that it seems so direct and so simplistic to do, but without an accurate strategy to be able to implement that change, we start to see barriers to how people can navigate it. And so you start to see things like change fatigue. People are exhausted from things constantly changing or not changing enough. So when you're trying to implement or try something new, you might experience some element of change fatigue. People being resistant, people not wanting to. Here we go doing something new again. That might be a form of change fatigue. And in a trauma-informed care environment, we're acknowledging that people, or even the folks who we're serving, not wanting to constantly change different things might be a result of that traumatic stress or chronic stress with things changing constantly within our environment. Compassion fatigue. You begin to get so exposed to things readily again and again that eventually it becomes normative, or it's like, why are we even complaining about this when there's now this even bigger thing, that barometer that you have, that scale that you have in the line of work that you're in, that scale is constantly changing. And so compassion fatigue inevitably will be a part of that process as you're looking at things completely differently now. And so getting back to a place of saying, what was normal, what is normal, what's my baseline, what was my baseline, what's the team's baseline, how have we moved far from that, is a very important part of the strategy. And then decision fatigue. We know that when people have to make multiple decisions, especially the folks who are serving, they make more decisions in the first few hours of their day than most people make in an entire week. And that decision fatigue can also lead to people shutting down or less opportunities for folks to engage. So we want to have and create a space where people have some alleviation of that decision fatigue. But again, these are very strategic approaches to talk about, to name, or to embed within the culture the space to discuss these things in order to change the environment. I'm going to show this one slide, and then I'm going to allow the rest of our time for us to kind of look at some examples or some suggestions collectively based on what we've been able to talk about today. I like to use this as a starting point for people, especially as you go back and think about what needs to be implemented within organizations. There are some tangible strategies that I use and some frameworks for like accountability that I think really get to specific examples, and I'll provide my contact information if folks want to kind of process through those. But at a larger scale, this is something that anyone can bring back to your team, to the folks who you're serving, to your organization, etc., to begin to think about what ingredients would be needed to successfully begin to change the environment to be more trauma informed and to be more healing centered. I am not a great baker or cook, but I do know if you don't have the right ingredients, it will not turn out well. Also, the reason why I'm not a great baker or a great cook. This so similarly to when you're creating a dish, when we're trying to make change, we need the right necessary ingredients. So let's say you have the skills, people know what they're doing, people feel incentivized, motivated to do it. Folks have the resources. Maybe that's the time, the people capacity. Maybe if we're talking about people we serve, they have the information that they need and they have an action plan. They know the next steps. They know where to go. They know where to gather information. But the broader vision of why we're doing this is not established. That can lead people to be confused. So if we're dealing with folks who are really confused about a process, we probably need to lean into creating and establishing a more clear vision. Let's say we have that vision and we also have the incentives. People are motivated, the resources are there, and there is a specific action plan, those next steps, but people don't physically know how to. They don't know how to enter into the conversation. They don't know how to intervene in a bias. They don't know how to go and fill out a paper, whatever that skill is that's needed. If that's not there, then that's going to lead people to feel anxious and excluded. Let's say we have the vision and the skills, the resources and the action plan, but there's nothing incentivizing people. That's where we start to see that slow, gradual, incremental change. Yeah, we'll get to this. I'll get to this. And time continues to pass, but people are not actually seeing that change. The plan that's going to be in the 2029, we're going to definitely have our steps for a healing-centered organization. That gradual change is usually a result of us not having the necessary incentives. And then let's say we have the vision, the skills, the incentives, and the resources. I'm sorry, the vision, the skills, the incentives, and the action plan, but we don't have any resources. Anybody who's trying to do something without resources knows how frustrating that could be. Yeah, yes. Right? And the vision, skills, incentives, and resources, but you don't have an action plan. You don't know what that next step to take is. After we leave this meeting, we don't know what those next steps can be. That can lead to false starts, trying things, throwing things at the wall, seeing what sticks. There has to be a plan in place. There needs to be that action plan. And so we want to utilize this as maybe even something to help us like a diagnostic tool, to discern, are people frustrated? Are we slow into progress? Are we trying things and we're not necessarily knowing what to do? Are we confused? And what might be necessary for us to be able to make the change? So with our next 10 minutes, I want to talk about solution, focus, crowdsourcing, and we're going to think about interpersonal, organizational, or systemic next steps that we can take. So I have a resource here, or a link that I'm going to put into the chat, and I want people to just crowdsource it. You're putting your ideas. What is a potential next step that you can take or that you are thinking about that would provide an opportunity to begin to improve a more wellness-centered and trauma-informed environment, both in the interpersonal levels, in the organization levels, and if you're wanting to maybe try out the systemic level. When you open that link that I put into the chat, you'll see that there is a plus sign next to each of the main labels. If you click the plus sign, a box will populate and it'll say subject and write something beautiful. I would love it if folks can begin to just share into the chat, into the Padlet document that I just submitted. What is a next step? What is a strategy? What is something that you learned in this training that you'll apply to create a more trauma-informed environment at the interpersonal, organizational, and maybe if you can even think of some systemic levels. And let's see what we come up with as a group. Jaden, I love that quote that you put into the chat. That's nice. Thank you for sharing that. That's good. I can see folks in the document. Be open-minded. You never know what someone else is going through. Yeah. You can choose to share your name or not share your name in Padlet. Either one's fine. All is welcome. If someone is not able to work the Padlet but wants to contribute, you can also tell me and I can post it for you. Processing difference. I am having to remind myself more and more of this lately. The focus on processing differences. Lead with authentic inquisition after creating a safe space for sharing. Everyone's beautiful in their own way. Trying to recognize the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, faint as it manifests across our clients, personalities, ages, emotional or mental states. Expecting a lack of closure can keep away the compassion fatigue. Yes. Ask questions. It's okay not to not know. Make mistakes and come from a place of genuine curiosity. I love that. Kindness, hopefulness. I try to smile and speak with kindness for a positive day. Please continue to share interpersonal. I want us to think about some organizationals. Diane, if you want to share it with me, I'm happy to put it to. Hopefully you can just push the plus sign and add. If not, if you type in the chat, we'll include it as well. Yeah, because I will share this out with folks afterwards. So organizationally, I want you to think about what are some things that you can take back to your organization, things that you can begin to implement, whether that's a shift in the policies or the procedures, if it's a shift in your check-in meeting, if it's a shift in your intake form, if it's a shift in how you depict information on your outreach and engagement strategies. What are some things that you could do organizationally that will begin to tie into this very vulnerable space of being trauma informed and to gather more information, but also create more spaces directly for people to provide feedback that can really help change the culture. Create a safe space to be open-minded with clients. You never know what the responses will be. Let them talk and listen with an open mind. Looking for what ingredients we may be missing, ideas, policies, programs. Looking at reaction to past policy changes. That's a big part of it. To interrogate what ingredients got lost. That's great. Creating a space of action and compassion to socially engineer a structure that creates the best results. Intentionality. Revisit materials about this topic. Maybe not an hour's worth of materials, but a circle, a check-in, a quick article on trauma-informed care at all staff meetings. Huge. Absolutely. Right. Working with a organization that really struggled with bias and influencing the environment. One of the things that they did is they just had a statement that they would read at the beginning of their team meetings that says, we're committed in this group to be mindful of how the identities and experiences of the people we serve impact our perspective. Or there was another group that I worked with that they, at the beginning of all of their team processes, they would say, we treat people how we see people, and we'll be mindful of that as we go into this conversation. It can be things that impact the culture like that. It could be creating more opportunities for training, right? These are all potential organizational shifts. Acknowledge good work, find organic ways to help when asked. Yeah. Love the point about challenging the toughen up, right? They will eat you alive bias. No one's eating anyone else. And it's such dehumanizing BS. Yeah. You can be kind, caring, soft, and cheerful while still being effective, intelligent, and competent in providing care. Some of our intake forms, clients become overwhelmed with or even take offense to. So maybe taking another look at how we can rephrase or even eliminating. That is going to impact culture so tremendously. Some of it would be helpful to allow the paperwork to be done slowly instead of always being important at the start. They find it, especially if someone's processing differently, right? May find it difficult to trust, and being on a time crunch for paperwork can really hurt building a relationship. You can slowly get the information over a few meetings than sitting for an hour or more right from the start and being asked tough questions, sometimes about your trauma experience. That's good. These are excellent. And I know that there's some being added to some of the areas after. I do want to share that I will de-identify these and share these back with the group, so that you all have access to it when the recording comes out, so that you can think about other people's strategies and how you might implement them into your practice as well. Systemically looking at ingredients and how we can get other systems, resources, organizations to buy in. I love that, to what we're doing. If people are not seeing the value of it, people are going to dismiss it or deprioritizing it. Let's have those hard conversations. That's courageous. Offering opportunities to educate the public and the systemic community about trauma-informed care to change attitudes, policies that cause harm. Yes. And even maybe some of that, like about the impact of biases, because some people are like, I don't have bias. But then they're like, but I did participate in that. So maybe I'm contributing in that way. I think that's fantastic. Working as a team, supporting each other and listening. That's absolutely a systemic objective. Identifying barriers to being with others and advocating against these barriers to our representatives. There's so much power and thought and creativity and innovation and boldness. To go back to my favorite quote within the presentation today, that you all are sharing through this crowdsourcing. This link will continue to be live even after the conversation ends today. You won't be able to download it, but I will provide it back to you. I will make sure that it is shared, and I will make sure that you have access to it. I will send it to Rosa to disseminate out to the folks who are registered for today. You'll see in the chat, there's a link to a satisfaction survey, as well as a link to request a certificate of completion form. Please grab those before you head out today, but I want to just take a moment before we close out to thank you for sharing, to thank you for the work that you're doing, and to thank you for being so engaged in this conversation with us all. Okay. Caroline, can you reshare those? Okay. And they will be shared in an email as well. Perfect, Jordan. So if you can't see it in the chat, we'll also make sure that it's in the email as well. Thank you all for your time. And I hope to connect with you all soon.